In the cold void of space, reputation is everything. Humanity earned theirs the hard way, through blood, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that makes legends. When the galaxy's most feared predators find themselves dying in the darkness, there's only one species crazy enough to answer their distress call. Sometimes being labeled dangerous is exactly what the universe needs. Commander Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the cold metal of the observation deck's viewport, watching the stars will slowly pass as the UES Defiant continued its patrol route through the neutral zone. 3 months into what should have been a routine 6-month mission, and the only action they'd seen was a broken-down merchant vessel carrying Altarian Sil traders who'd looked at her crew like they were examining dangerous animals in a zoo. "Ma'am, we're receiving a priority transmission on the emergency frequencies," called out Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. His voice carried an odd note that made Sarah turn away from the stars. "What kind of transmission, Lieutenant?" It's Croaxium, ma'am. Auto distress beacon. Ship designation translates to something like Bone Crusher or Skull Breaker. The universal translator is having trouble with their military nomenclature." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The Croaxians were the bogeymen of this sector, 8-foot-tall reptilian predators whose ships looked like they'd been forged in the depths of hell itself. Their empire had been expanding steadily for the past 50 years, crushing smaller civilizations and incorporating their technology into an ever-growing war machine. Most species gave Croaxian vessels a wide berth, and for good reason. Distance and bearing? Approximately 4 light hours spinward, ma'am. The signal strength suggests a capital ship, possibly a Dreadnought-class vessel. Sarah walked over to the tactical display, her boots clicking against the deck plating in the sudden silence that had fallen over the bridge. The holographic representation of local space showed their position relative to the distress signal, a pulsing red that seemed to throb like a wounded heart. "XO," she called the commander Park, who was studying sensor readings at his station. "What's the Defiant's current status?" "All systems green, Captain. Weapons charged, shields at full capacity. We've got a full complement of Marines, and our medical bay is currently at 20% capacity." Sarah nodded, though her mind was already racing through the implications. The UES Defiant was a heavy cruiser, impressive by human standards, but barely half the size of a Croaxian Dreadnought. If this was some kind of trap, they'd be outgunned by a factor of 10. But if it wasn't, "Lieutenant Torres, can you determine the nature of their distress?" The young communications officer worked his console for several moments before looking up with a troubled expression. "The automated systems are reporting catastrophic engine failure, life support degradation, and what the translator calls crew mortality approaching critical threshold. Ma'am, according to this data, they've got maybe 18 hours before total life support failure." "How many souls aboard?" "Approximately 800, ma'am. Standard Croaxian Dreadnought crew complement." Sarah stared at the tactical display, her mind working through the variables. 800 Croaxians, members of a species that had never shown mercy to anyone, whose ships regularly hunted down refugee convoys, and whose diplomatic first contact usually involved demands for immediate surrender. The same species that had glassed 3 human colonies in the Outer Rim before the current ceasefire had been established. "Captain," Commander Park said quietly, moving to stand beside her, "I know what you're thinking, but we need to consider the strategic implications. The Croaxians have made it clear they consider humanity a dangerous, unpredictable species. Every interaction we have with them is scrutinized by their high command and used to justify their military buildup in this sector." Sarah knew he was right. The official Croaxian position, broadcast throughout their empire and echoed by several other species, was that humans were fundamentally unstable, prone to sudden violent action, impossible to predict, and therefore too dangerous to be allowed full membership in the Galactic Council. They pointed to humanity's history of warfare, their rapid technological advancement, and what they called reckless disregard for established protocols as evidence of their unsuitability for civilized space. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres interrupted, I'm also picking up secondary signals. Looks like at least 3 other vessels have detected the distress beacon. 2 Altarian science ships and a hegemony patrol craft. They're all changing course to avoid the area. Sarah wasn't surprised. The Croaxians had a well-earned reputation for shooting first and asking questions later, even when they were the ones in trouble. Most species had learned that the safest policy was to stay as far away from Croaxian military vessels as possible, distressed or not. "Captain," came a new voice from behind them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Defiant's chief medical officer, had stepped onto the bridge. "I couldn't help but overhear. 800 beings in life support failure. Regardless of species, that's 800 lives." Sarah turned to face the doctor, seeing her own internal conflict reflected in the woman's eyes. Elena had joined Starfleet Medical after spending 5 years with the Doctors Without Borders organization back on Earth, and her dedication to preserving life regardless of politics was well known throughout the fleet. "Doctor, these are Croaxians. They've made it clear they consider us a threat to galactic stability. If we approach their vessel, there's a significant chance they'll interpret it as an attack and fire on us despite their disabled status. And if we don't approach," Elena replied firmly, "800 sapient beings will die while we watch. Is that the message we want to send about human values?" Commander Park shook his head. "Doctor, with respect, this isn't about values. This is about strategic reality. The Croaxians have been looking for an excuse to reclassify humans from potentially dangerous to actively hostile. If we approach their Dreadnought, especially while it's disabled, they could claim we were attempting to board and capture their vessel. That kind of incident could spark a war." Sarah found herself thinking about her daughter back on Earth, probably sitting in her university xenobiology class right now, learning about the diverse species that made up the galactic community. What kind of galaxy would that girl inherit? One where species helped each other regardless of politics, or one where fear and suspicion ruled every interaction? "Lieutenant Torres," she said finally, "open a channel to the Croaxian vessel. Wideband all frequencies." "Mom." "You heard me." Torres's fingers danced over his console, and after a moment he nodded. "Channel open, Captain." Sarah took a deep breath. "Croaxian vessel Bone Crusher. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earthship Defiant. We have received your distress signal and are prepared to offer assistance. Please respond." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. Seconds stretched into minutes, and Sarah was beginning to wonder if the Croaxian communications array had failed along with their other systems when Torres straightened at his station. "Captain, incoming transmission. It's voice only, and the translator is having trouble with the accent, but I think I've got it. Put it through." The voice that emerged from the speakers was deep, gravelly, and carried undertones that made Sarah think of distant thunder. The universal translator gave it a stiff, formal quality that somehow made it even more intimidating. "Human vessel. I am War Commander Thakvar of the Imperial Dreadnought Skullrender. Your offer of assistance is unexpected. Why do you not flee like the others?" Sarah glanced at Commander Park, who was shaking his head almost imperceptibly, then keyed the communications array herself. "War Commander, we're responding because sapient beings are in distress. That's what humans do." There was another long pause before the Croaxian's voice returned, and this time Sarah thought she detected something like confusion in the tone. "You would risk your vessel to aid those your species has designated as enemies?" "We've never designated your species as enemies, War Commander. We've simply defended ourselves when attacked. There's a difference." Another pause, this one even longer. Sarah could imagine the Croaxian commander conferring with his bridge crew, trying to understand the tactical situation. From their perspective, this had to seem like either an incredibly elaborate trap or evidence that humans were even more unpredictable than they'd thought. "Captain Chun," the voice finally returned, "my vessel suffers critical damage from encounter with spatial anomaly. Main power systems failing. Life support degrading. My crew." There was a pause, and when the voice continued, Sarah heard something she'd never expected from a Croaxian warrior: vulnerability. My crew dies slowly. Your small ship cannot provide meaningful assistance. Sarah looked at the tactical display again, noting the size differential between their vessels. The Defiant carried a crew of 300 and had been designed as a fast, maneuverable warship. The Croaxian Dreadnought was a mobile fortress built for siege warfare and planetary bombardment. War Commander, with respect, you might be surprised what humans can accomplish when we put our minds to it. Are you willing to let us try? The silence stretched so long that Sarah began to wonder if the communication link had been severed. Then, just as she was about to speak again, the Croaxian's voice returned. Very well, Captain Chun. I will lower our defensive shields and permit your approach. But know this: if you attempt any hostile action against my vessel or crew, I will use what power remains to destroy your ship, even if it costs the lives of my remaining warriors. Understood, Va Commander. We'll be there in 6 hours. Defiant out. Sarah closed the channel and turned to face her bridge crew, seeing a mixture of apprehension and determination on their faces. Commander Park stepped closer, lowering his voice. Sarah, I hope you know what you're doing. If this goes wrong, it won't just be our careers on the line. This could affect human-Croaxian relations for generations. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Maybe that's exactly why we need to do this right. Helm, set course for the Croaxian vessel, best possible speed. Aye, Captain, responded Lieutenant Commander Williams from the helm station. Course laid in. Dr. Vasquez, I want you to prepare the medical bay for massive trauma cases. We're probably looking at radiation exposure, decompression injuries, and whatever other damage a spatial anomaly can inflict on a living being. Already on it, Captain. I'll also prepare emergency triage protocols. If their life support is as bad as they indicate, we might need to evacuate some of their crew to our ship. Sarah paused at that thought. The Defiant had never hosted Croaxian guests, and she wasn't even sure their environmental systems were compatible. Work with engineering on atmospheric requirements. Croaxians breathe a nitrogen-oxygen mix similar to ours, but they prefer higher humidity and temperature. Will do, Captain. As the Defiant changed course and began accelerating toward the disabled Dreadnought, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation she'd have to have with Starfleet Command when this was all over. Admiral Rodriguez was going to have some very pointed questions about why she'd risked a valuable ship and crew to help the same species that had been advocating for humanity's removal from civilized space. But as she watched the stars begin to shift on the main view screen, Sarah realized she was at peace with her decision. Sometimes being human meant doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. Sometimes it meant proving that being labeled dangerous didn't have to mean being heartless. Time to intercept, she asked. 5 hours, 43 minutes at current speed, Captain. Mr. Park, I want all department heads in the briefing room in 30 minutes. We're going to plan this rescue operation down to the last detail. Aye, Captain. As her crew began preparations for what might be the most important mission of their careers, Sarah Chun stood at the center of the bridge, watching the distant stars and wondering if they were about to change the course of galactic history, or simply prove once and for all the humans really were too dangerous for civilized space. Either way, 800 lives hung in the balance, and Sarah Chun had never been the type of person to walk away from beings in need, regardless of what species they happened to be. The Defiant raced through the void toward an uncertain fate, carrying with it the hopes and fears of two species who had never learned to trust each other. In 6 hours, they would either save 800 lives or start a war that could consume the entire sector. Sarah had never been more proud to be human. The briefing room aboard the US Defiant had never felt smaller. Captain Sarah Chun stood at the head of the polished metal table, looking at the faces of her senior staff as they processed the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The holographic display in the center of the table showed a rotating three-dimensional image of a Croaxian Dreadnought, a vessel that looked like it had been designed by someone with a deep appreciation for intimidation. Initial sensor sweeps confirm what War Commander Thakvar told us, reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the ship's science officer. The skull renders suffered what appears to be a catastrophic interaction with a quantum filament. Their main power core is operating at 12% capacity, and we're reading massive structural damage along their port side. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, studying the damage reports on her tablet. What about casualties? Do we have any idea what we're walking into medically? The Croaxians aren't exactly forthcoming with details, Hayes replied, but based on the radiation signatures and atmospheric readings, I'd estimate they've lost at least 200 crew members already. The survivors are dealing with radiation poisoning, decompression exposure, and what the computer classifies as severe systemic trauma. Commander Park drummed his fingers on the table, his expression troubled. Even if we can help with the medical situation, how are we supposed to repair Dreadnought? Their technology is completely different from ours. We might as well try to fix a pocket watch with a sledgehammer. Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez looked up from her technical specifications. Actually, Commander, that might not be entirely true. I've been studying the sensor data, and while their systems are definitely alien, the fundamental principles are the same. Matter-antimatter reactions, plasma conduits, magnetic containment fields. Physics is physics, regardless of who builds the ship. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. How confident are you about that assessment, Chief? Confident enough to try, Captain. I can't promise miracles, but if their damage is primarily structural and we can get their power system stabilized, we might be able to at least restore life support to safe levels. The ship's security chief, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Captain, I have to ask, what's our security posture going to be during this operation? We're talking about boarding a Croaxian warship with 8-foot-tall predators who've been trained from birth to kill anything that threatens them. Sarah had been dreading this part of the conversation. What are your recommendations, Mr. Jackson? Honestly, full combat gear, heavy weapons, and a lot of backup. Croaxians are notoriously unstable when they're wounded or stressed, and these particular Croaxians are dying slowly in a metal box. Even if they want our help, there's no guarantee they won't lash out at the nearest target when things get desperate. Dr. Vasquez shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. If we show up looking like an invasion force, we'll confirm every negative stereotype they have about humans. We need to approach this as a humanitarian mission, not a military operation. Doctor, with all due respect, Jackson replied, humanitarian missions don't usually involve species that could tear a human in half with their bare claws. Sarah held up a hand to forestall the brewing argument. We're going to split the difference. Security teams will be armed and ready, but they'll remain aboard the Defiant unless specifically requested. Our boarding parties will carry sidearms only, and they'll be under strict orders to avoid any action that could be construed as aggressive. Jackson didn't look happy with the compromise, but he nodded. Understood, Captain. I'll have medical teams standing by in case things go south. Speaking of medical teams, Dr. Vasquez interjected, I've been researching Croaxian physiology, and there are some significant differences we need to account for. Their circulatory system uses a copper-based blood analog instead of iron-based hemoglobin. Their normal body temperature runs about 15 degrees higher than humans, and their bone structure is roughly 3 times denser. What does that mean for treatment? Sarah asked. It means most of our standard medical equipment won't work on them. I'm going to have to improvise with what we have and hope for the best. The good news is that their immune systems are incredibly robust. They're unlikely to suffer adverse reactions to our medical interventions. The bad news is that their enhanced healing factor means wounds that would kill a human might just make them angry. Lieutenant Torres, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. Captain, I've been monitoring Croaxia emergency frequencies, and there's something else you should know. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of something? 3 hours ago, the Croaxian High Command dispatched a battle group to investigate the Skull Render's distress signal. ETA, approximately 14 hours from now. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah could hear the subtle vibration of the ship's engines and the whisper of air circulation, but no one seemed to be breathing. Commander Park was the first to speak. How large a battle group? At least 6 vessels, possibly more. The signal encrypted, but I'm picking up drive signatures consistent with heavy cruisers and at least one more Dreadnought-class ship. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, recalculating the timeline. They had maybe 10 hours to complete the rescue operation and get clear before the Croaxian battle group arrived. If they were still aboard the Skull Render when the cavalry showed up, it could be interpreted as an attempted boarding action, an act of war. Options? She asked. We could turn around, Park suggested quietly. Report the situation to Starfleet Command and let them handle the diplomatic implications. No one would blame us for refusing to risk the ship and crew, except the 800 Croaxians who would die while we're filing paperwork, Dr. Vasquez said sharply. Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying the holographic display. Actually, Captain, the arrival of the Croaxian battle group might work in our favor. How do you figure that? Think about it from their perspective. If we were planning some kind of hostile action, will we stick around for a fight against 6 warships? Our presence when they arrive proves that our intentions are genuinely humanitarian. Chief Martinez nodded slowly. And if we can get their ship operational before the battle group arrives, we'll have saved them the embarrassment of having to request assistance. Croaxians are big on honor and self-sufficiency. Sarah felt the pieces of a plan beginning to form in her mind. All right, here's what we're going to do. Chief Martinez, I want you to assemble your best engineering teams. You'll have primary responsibility for restoring power and life support to the Skull Render. Dr. Vasquez, you'll lead the medical teams. Focus on the most critical cases first. We might not have time to save everyone. What about communication protocols? Torres asked. If we're going to be working alongside Croaxian crew members, we need to establish some basic operational procedures. Sarah turned to Commander Park. XO, you'll coordinate with War Commander Thakvar to ensure smooth cooperation between our crews. Make it clear that we're there to help, not to take control of their vessel. Park nodded, though Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. Understood, Captain. What about our exit strategy? We work as fast as possible and get out before the battle group arrives. If we're still there when they show up, we explain the situation and hope they're feeling grateful instead of suspicious. Lieutenant Commander Jackson cleared his throat. And if they're not feeling grateful? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then we remind them that we just saved 800 of their people and hope that means something to them. The briefing broke up shortly afterward, with each department head racing to prepare for the most unusual rescue mission in recent memory. Sarah remained in the briefing room for several minutes after the others left, staring at the holographic image of the damaged Dreadnought and trying to convince herself that she hadn't just made the worst decision of her career. An hour later, the Defiant dropped out of warp within visual range of the Skull Render, and the sight that greeted them was even more sobering than the sensor reports had suggested. The massive Croaxian vessel hung dead in space, its usually imposing silhouette marred by a gaping wound that ran along nearly half its length. Emergency lights flickered weakly along its hull, and atmosphere was venting from several smaller breaches. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Williams from the helm station. "How are they still alive in there?" "Croaxian engineering is built for warfare," Hayes replied grimly. "Their ships are designed to take massive damage and keep fighting. The question is how much longer they can hold out." Sarah activated the communications array. "War Commander Thakvar, this is Captain Shun. We're approaching your position and are ready to begin assistance operations." The response came almost immediately, though the voice was noticeably weaker than before. "Captain Shun, I must inform you that our situation has deteriorated further. We have lost sections 7 through 12 to complete atmospheric breach. Crew deaths now number 237. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They'd lost 37 more crew members just during the Defiant's journey to their location. War Commander, we're going to dock with your ship and begin emergency repairs immediately. Our medical team is standing by to assist your wounded. There was a pause before the Croaxian replied. Captain Shun, I must ask, why do you do this? Your species gains nothing from aiding us. Indeed, many in my government would view your actions with suspicion. Sarah looked around the bridge, seeing the faces of her crew as they monitored the conversation. These were good people, scientists, explorers, healers, who had joined Starfleet to make the galaxy a better place. They deserve an honest answer. War Commander, my species believes that when someone calls for help, you answer. It doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, or what they've done in the past. When sapient beings are in trouble, humans help. That's who we are. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before the Croaxian's voice returned, and this time Sarah heard something unexpected in the tone. What might have been respect. Very well, Captain Shun. Transmitting docking coordinates now. Be advised that many of my crew are unpredictable in their current condition. I will do what I can to ensure your safety, but I cannot guarantee the actions of warriors facing death. Understood, Va Commander. We'll be careful. As the Defiant maneuvered toward the docking port of the massive alien warship, Sarah felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. In the next few hours, her crew would either prove that humans could be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship, or they would provide ammunition for those who argued that humanity was too dangerous for civilized space. Either way, there was no turning back now. 800 lives were counting on them, and Sarah Chun had never learned how to disappoint people who needed her help. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant clang that echoed through the Defiant's hull, and Sarah knew that whatever happened next would echo through history for generations to come. The airlock cycled with a hiss that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet aboard the Defiant. Captain Sarah Chun stood in the docking bay alongside her rescue teams, watching as the massive blast doors that separated them from the Croaxian Dreadnought slowly iris opened. The first thing that hit them was the smell, a mixture of ozone, burned metal, and something organic that made her think of copper and earth. Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted the portable atmospheric analyzer clipped to her belt. Air composition is within acceptable parameters, she reported quietly. Slightly higher CO2 than optimal, but breathable. Temperature is reading 42 degrees Celsius. Chief Engineer Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. That's going to make working in full gear interesting. Better than working in a vacuum, Sarah replied, though she could already feel perspiration beginning to form under her duty uniform. The inner airlock of the Croaxian vessel opened with a deep, resonant groan, and Sarah got her first look at the interior of an alien warship. The corridor beyond was easily twice as wide as those aboard the Defiant, with ceilings that soared nearly 15 feet above their heads. The walls were a dark, gunmetal gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the deck plating was etched with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. But it was the Croaxian warrior waiting to greet them that truly drove home just how far from human space they were. War Commander Thakvar stood nearly 8.5 feet tall, his reptilian features partially obscured by the breathing apparatus he wore over what Sarah assumed was his mouth and nose. His scales were a deep emerald green that shifted to darker shades along the edges, and his eyes were large, golden, and entirely too intelligent for comfort. He wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor over a form-fitting environmental suit, though Sarah could see scorch marks and stress fractures that spoke of recent damage. Captain Shun, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the breathing apparatus. The universal translator gave his words a formal, almost archaic quality. I greet you in the name of the Croaxian Imperial Fleet. I confess, this is an unusual circumstance. Sarah stepped forward, acutely aware that she barely reached the alien's chest. Va Commander Takva, thank you for allowing us aboard. These are my senior officers, Commander Park Dr. Vasquez and Chief Engineer Martinez. The Croaxian's golden gaze swept over each of them in turn, and Sarah noticed that his attention lingered on Dr. Vasquez's medical equipment. "A healer," he said, something like relief in his voice. "Good. We have great need of healing." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with a confident manner that had made her such an effective physician. "War Commander, I'll need to examine your wounded as soon as possible. Time is critical with radiation poisoning." "Indeed. I will have Subcommander Krell escort you to our medical bay. Be warned, many of our wounded are not in their right minds. Pain and approaching death make even disciplined warriors unpredictable." As if summoned by his words, another Croaxian appeared from the shadows of the corridor. This one was slightly smaller than the war commander, though still imposing by human standards, and bore visible wounds, a jagged scar across the left side of his face, and what appeared to be a poorly treated burn along his right arm. "Subcommander Krell," Thakvar said, "escort the human healers to Medical Section 3. Ensure their safety, but do not interfere with their work." Krell inclined his massive head. "As you command, War Commander." His voice was rougher than his superiors, with what sounded like pain underlying each word. Dr. Vasquez gathered her medical team and followed the injured Croaxian deeper into the ship. Sarah watched them go with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Elena was walking into an alien medical facility to treat injuries she'd never encountered in species she'd only read about in xenobiology textbooks. "Chief Martinez," Sarah said, "what do you need from the war commander to begin repairs?" The engineer consulted her tablet, though Sarah noticed her eyes kept drifting to the alien architecture around them. "I need access to your primary power distribution center and main engineering. If we can stabilize your matter-antimatter reaction, we can start bringing secondary systems online." War Commander Thakvar studied Martinez for a long moment. "You would work with Croaxian technology? Our systems are not designed for human manipulation." Martinez smiled, though Sarah could see the nervousness beneath her confident exterior. "War Commander, I've been fixing things since I was 8 years old. Engines are engines, whether they're powering a starship or a ground car. The principles are the same." Something that might have been amusement flickered in the Croaxian's golden eyes. "Very well, Engineer Martinez. I will have Techmaster Vorth assist you. But know that if you damage our systems further, you'll feed me to something with lots of teeth," Martinez finished. "Got it. Where's your engineering section?" As Martinez and her team departed with another Croaxian escort, Sarah found herself alone with War Commander Thakvar and Commander Park. The silence stretched for a moment before the alien warrior spoke. "Captain Shun, may I speak freely?" Sarah nodded. "Of course. When your ship appeared on our sensors, my first instinct was to order what weapons remained functional to target your vessel. In our military doctrine, the approach of an enemy ship during a moment of vulnerability is considered preparation for attack." Commander Park tensed beside her, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. "What changed your mind?" "Your initial communication. The offer of assistance without demands or conditions. In my experience, predatory species do not typically announce their presence to weaken prey." Tukvar Post, studying her face. "But I still do not understand your motivation. What do humans gain from preserving Croaxian lives?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. This conversation would likely be reported to Croaxian High Command, and her words could influence human-Croaxian relations for years to come. "War Commander, humans believe that every sapient life has value, regardless of what species that life belongs to. When we encounter beings in distress, we help. It's that simple. But surely you must expect something in return. Territorial concessions. Technology transfer. Strategique alliance." "No," Sarah said simply. "We expect nothing except the knowledge that we did the right thing." The Croaxian was silent for a long time, his golden eyes studying her face as if trying to detect some hidden deception. Finally, he spoke again, and his voice carried a note of confusion. "Your species is indeed difficult to understand. The Hegemony Council has labeled humans as dangerously unpredictable because you do not conform to established patterns of interspecies behavior. Perhaps they are correct, though not in the way they intended." Before Sarah could respond, An alarm began blaring throughout the ship, a deep, pulsing sound that seemed to resonate in her bones. Thakvar immediately activated a communication device on his wrist and spoke rapidly in what Sarah assumed was untranslated Croaxian. "What is it?" she asked. "Hull breach in Section 14. We are losing more atmosphere." His golden eyes met hers. "Captain Chun, we have perhaps 6 hours before total life support failure. Your engineer must work quickly." As if summoned by his words, Martinez's voice crackled over the communicator. "Captain, I'm in their main engineering section, and it's impressive. Their power core is about 3 times the size of ours, but the damage is extensive. I'm going to need every engineer we have if we're going to get this thing running." "Do it, Chief. Deploy all teams." "Already on it, ma'am." "But, Captain, there's something else. The Croaxi engineers down here have been working for 3 days straight without rest, trying to save their ship. They're exhausted, some of them are wounded, and they're still working. I've never seen dedication like this." Sarah looked at War Commander Thakvar, seeing something in his expression that she was beginning to recognize as pride mixed with grief. "These are your people," she said. It wasn't a question. "They are warriors of the Imperial fleet," he replied formally. "They will die at their post before abandoning their duty. They don't have to die at all, if we can help it." Another alarm joined the first, this one higher-pitched and more urgent. Thakvar checked his wrist device again, and Sarah saw his massive frame tense. "What now?" "Fire in Section 9. We have crew trapped beyond the flames." He looked at her, and Sarah was surprised to see something like desperation in those alien features. "Captain Chun, my remaining firefighting equipment was damaged in the initial incident. Do your people have capabilities in this area?" Sarah was about to respond when Lieutenant Torres's voice came through her communicator. "Captain, we're picking up the fire on our sensors. It's spreading toward what looks like a crew compartment with approximately 40 Croaxians inside." Commander Park stepped forward. "Captain, our firefighting teams are equipped for shipboard operations. We could deploy them." But Thakvar interrupted. "Human firefighting techniques may not be suitable for Croaxian vessel architecture. Our atmospheric composition, structural materials, fire suppression systems, all are different from human standards." Sarah made a decision that would have given Starfleet safety regulation officers nightmares. "War Commander, are you willing to let us try? Our people can adapt to alien conditions, and 40 lives are worth the risk." The Croaxian warrior studied her for a long moment, then slowly inclined his massive head. "I will assign guides to assist your firefighting teams. But, Captain, if your people are injured or killed aboard my vessel, the diplomatic implications will be my responsibility, not yours," Sarah finished. "Mr. Park, deploy firefighting teams immediately. Full environmental gear, alien operations protocol." As Park coordinated with the Defiant to deploy additional rescue teams, Sarah found herself alone with the War Commander once again. The sounds of his dying ship echoed around them. Creaking metal, distant alarms, the whisper of atmosphere leaking into space. "Captain Chun," Thakvar said quietly, "I begin to understand why the Hegemony Council finds humans so troubling. You do not behave as other species do." "How do other species behave?" "With calculation. With consideration of cost versus benefit. With regard for political consequences." His golden eyes met hers. No other species would risk their people and their ships to save strangers who have been designated as potential enemies. Sarah thought about that as another alarm began sounding somewhere in the depths of the ship. "Maybe that's the problem with the galaxy, War Commander. Too much calculation, not enough compassion." Before he could respond, Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the communicator, and Sarah heard exhaustion and strain in her tone. "Captain, I need to speak with you. Medical Bay, as soon as possible." Sarah looked at the War Commander. "With your permission?" "Of course. Subcommander Krell will escort you." As they made their way through the corridors of the alien ship, Sarah couldn't help but notice the signs of damage everywhere. Scorch marks on the walls, emergency patches on what appeared to be hull breaches, and the occasional Croaxian warrior working desperately to maintain systems that looked like they were barely holding together. But what struck her most was the way the Croaxian crew members looked at her and her people, not with hostility or suspicion, but with something that might have been hope. For the first time since this rescue mission began, Sarah started to believe they might actually succeed. The Croaxian medical bay was unlike anything Dr. Elena Vasquez had ever seen. The ceiling soared 20 feet overhead, supported by massive structural beams that gave the space an almost cathedral-like quality. Medical beds designed for 8-foot-tall warriors lined the walls, many of them occupied by injured Croaxians whose golden eyes tracked her movements with a mixture of pain and wariness. But it wasn't the alien architecture that took Elena's breath away. It was the condition of the patients. "Captain," she said quietly into her communicator as Sarah Chun approached with Subcommander Krell, "we have a situation here that's beyond anything I've dealt with before." Sarah entered the medical bay and immediately understood Elena's concern. The injured Croaxians were in far worse condition than anyone had anticipated. Burns covered much of their scaled skin, and several showed signs of severe radiation poisoning. Their normally emerald scales had taken on a sickly gray pallor, and their breathing was labored and irregular. But what struck Sarah most profoundly was the way they watched her medical teams work. Human doctors and nurses moved between the alien patients with the same careful professionalism they would show to any injured person, adjusting their techniques and equipment to accommodate Croaxian physiology. And the giant warriors, beings who had been trained from birth to see humans as potential threats, submitted to treatment with something approaching wonder. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah said quietly, "what's our status?" Elena wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a small streak on her cheek. "We've treated 63 patients so far. The good news is that Croaxian physiology is remarkably resilient. Injuries that would be fatal to a human can be treated successfully with some modification of our standard procedures. And the bad news? The bad news is that we're running up against the fundamental incompatibility between human and Croaxian medical technology. Their cellular structure is different enough that some of our equipment doesn't work on them at all." Sarah watched as one of her nurses, Petty Officer Kim, carefully adjusted a 4-drip connected to a Croaxian warrior whose arm was wrapped in what appeared to be severe burn dressings. The alien's golden eyes followed Kim's movements, but there was no hostility in his gaze, only curiosity and perhaps gratitude. "How are you adapting?" "Trial and error, mostly," Elena replied with the tired honesty that came from hours of intensive work. "We've discovered that their immune systems are incredibly robust, which means we can use more aggressive treatments than would be safe with humans. On the other hand, their enhanced healing factor means that standard pain medication is almost useless. We've had to increase dosages by factors of 3 or 4. Subcommander Krell, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. "Dr. Vasquez, may I speak?" Elena nodded, though Sarah could see the exhaustion in her movements. "You have saved the lives of warriors who believe themselves beyond hope," the scarred Croaxian said, his voice carrying an emotion that the universal translator struggled to convey. "In our medical doctrine, many of these injuries would be classified as death wounds, injuries for which a warrior cannot recover. Yet your healers treat them as merely difficult." Elena managed a tired smile. "Subcommander, in human medicine, there's no such thing as a death wound until the patient actually dies. Until that moment, we keep trying." Before Krell could respond, another alarm began blaring throughout the ship. This one was different from the others. Faster, more urgent, with a quality that made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. "What is that?" she asked. Krell's massive frame tensed. "Hull breach alarm. Major structural failure." He activated his wrist communicator and spoke rapidly in untranslated Croaxian before turning back to them. "Section 12 has suffered catastrophic decompression. We have lost 17 more crew members." Sarah felt the weight of those deaths settle on her shoulders. 17 more lives that they hadn't been fast enough to save. She activated her own communicator. Chief Martinez, status report. The response came through with a backdrop of shouting and what sounded like arc welders. Captain, we've managed to stabilize the main power core and restore primary life support to about 60% of the ship. But the structural damage is worse than we initially thought. This ship took a beating that would have destroyed most vessels outright. How much longer until full restoration? There was a pause before Martinez replied, and Sarah could hear the exhaustion in her chief engineer's voice. At our current rate, maybe 4 hours for essential systems. But Captain, I'm not sure this ship is going to hold together that long. Some of these hull breaches are getting worse, and we don't have the materials or equipment for major structural repairs. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, running calculations in her head. For hours to complete repairs, but the ship might not survive that long. Meanwhile, the Croaxian battle group would arrive in less than 3 hours. If they were discovered aboard a crippled Croaxian Dreadnought when those warships arrived, the diplomatic implications could be catastrophic. Captain Shun, came War Commander Thakvar's voice through the ship's communication system. Please report to the bridge immediately. We have developed a complication. Sarah looked at Elena, seeing her own concerns reflected in the doctor's eyes. Keep working, Doctor. Save as many as you can. The journey to the Croaxian bridge was a revelation in itself. The corridors of the Skull Render were massive, designed for beings much larger than humans, but they were also beautiful in their own alien way. The walls were decorated with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed peripherally, and the ceiling was inlaid with what appeared to be star charts of Croaxian space. But the beauty was marred by the signs of catastrophic damage. Emergency patches covered hull breaches, exposed conduits sparked with unstable energy, and the air itself tasted of ozone and fear. The bridge was perhaps the most imposing space Sarah had ever seen. It rose 3 levels, with the command area at the center surrounded by stations for navigation, weapons control, communications, and engineering. Massive view screens showed the space around the ship, and Sarah could see her own vessel, the Defiant, docked to the Dreadnought's hull like a small boat tied to a pier. War Commander Thakvar stood at the center of the bridge, his massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of command during crisis. Around him, Croaxian officers worked at their stations with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they were racing against time. War Commander, Sarah said as she approached. What's the complication? Thakvar turned to face her, and Sarah saw something in his golden eyes that chilled her. Regret mixed with determination. Captain Shun, I have received communication from High Command regarding our situation. They have concerns about human presence aboard an Imperial vessel. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of concerns? They question your motives for providing assistance. Some in High Command believe this may be an elaborate attempt to gain intelligence about Croaxian military capabilities. Commander Park, who had been coordinating with the Defiant from a nearby console, looked up sharply. War Commander, surely you've explained that we're conducting a humanitarian rescue operation? Ihei, Tagva replied heavily. But there are those in High Command who believe humans incapable of truly altruistic action. They see calculation and deception where you see compassion. Sarah stepped closer to the massive alien commander. What are your orders, War Commander? The silence that followed was profound. Around them, the bridge crew continued their work, but Sarah could sense their attention focused on this conversation. Whatever Thakvar said next would determine the fate of both crews. My orders, he said finally, are to detain your personnel for questioning when the battle group arrives. High Command wishes to interview your people regarding their observations of Imperial technology and capabilities. The word interview carried implications that made Sarah's blood run cold. Croaxian interrogation methods were notoriously thorough and, by human standards, barbaric. And what do you intend to do about those orders? She asked. Thakvar studied her face for a long moment before answering. Captain Shun, in the past 6 hours, your people have saved the lives of over 200 of my warriors. Your healers have worked without rest to treat injuries that our own medical staff had declared beyond hope. Your engineers have accomplished repairs that my own technical specialists believed impossible. He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. Your firefighting teams risked their lives to rescue 40 crew members from Section 9, using techniques and equipment adapted on the spot to Croaxian vessel specifications. They asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to help. Sarah waited, sensing that the war commander was building towards something important. I have served in the Imperial Fleet for 37 years, Thakvar continued. I have fought in campaigns across 3 sectors. I have commanded warriors in battles against species that showed no mercy and expected none in return. But never in all that time have I witnessed the kind of selfless courage your people have shown today. He activated a control on his command chair, and the main view screen shifted to show an external view of the rescue operation. Human and Croaxian crew members worked side by side, their species differences forgotten in the face of shared purpose. High Command has labeled humans as dangerous, Thakvar said quietly. Perhaps they are correct. Perhaps any species capable of such unreasoning compassion is indeed dangerous. To those who profit from suffering, to those who see conflict as inevitable, to those who believe that strength must come at the expense of mercy. Sarah felt her heart racing as she began to understand what the war commander was saying. Captain Shun, when the battle group arrives, I will inform them that human assistance was requested and provided according to established rescue protocols. I will recommend that your species be reconsidered for full membership in the Galactic Council, with my personal endorsement of human character and capabilities. Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Torres's voice crackled through her communicator. Captain, we're detecting multiple warp signatures approaching our position. 6 vessels, all Croaxian design. ETA 23 minutes. Sarah looked at War Commander Thakvar. Will that be enough time to complete repairs? Unknown, he replied. But, Captain, regardless of what happens with the repairs, I want you to know that today you have given me a gift I did not expect. What gift is that? The massive alien commander looked around his bridge at the mixed human and Croaxian crew members working together to save his ship. Hope, he said simply. Hope that perhaps the galaxy is not as dark a place as I had believed. Hope that there are still species capable of choosing compassion over calculation. As alarms continued to sound throughout the ship and the countdown to the arrival of the Croaxian battle group continued, Sarah Chun found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with her daughter before this mission began. The girl had asked what humans brought to the galactic community that other species didn't already provide. Looking around at the bridge of an alien warship where human and Croaxian crew members worked side by side to save lives, Sarah thought she finally had an answer. Sometimes being dangerous was exactly what the galaxy needed. The final 20 minutes before the arrival of the Croaxian battle group passed with the kind of desperate efficiency that only comes when lives hang in the balance. Throughout the skull render, human and Croaxian crew members worked side by side, their species differences forgotten in the face of shared purpose. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the alien Dreadnought, watching the tactical display as 6 Croaxian warships dropped out of warp in perfect formation. The lead vessel was another Dreadnought, its hull bristling with weapons that could reduce the Defiant to scrap metal in seconds. The escort vessels spread out in a defensive pattern that clearly communicated their readiness for trouble. Incoming transmission, reported the Croaxian communications officer. Battle Group Commander Zorth requests immediate status report. War Commander Thakvar straightened in his command chair, the massive alien's golden eyes meeting Sarah's for a moment before he responded. Put him through. The main view screen shifted to show the bridge of the approaching Dreadnought. The Croaxian who appeared was even larger than Thakvar, his scales a deeper green with silver accents that marked him as high-ranking nobility. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely focused on the damaged state of the skull render. War Commander Thakvar, the newcomer said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. Explain the presence of human vessels in proximity to Imperial property. Sarah felt the tension on the bridge ratchet up several notches. Around them, Croaxian officers continued their work, but with the stiff efficiency of people who knew they were being watched by their superiors. Battle Group Commander Zoreth Thakvar replied formally. The human vessel Defiant responded to our distress signal and has provided humanitarian assistance. Their crew has saved the lives of over 200 Imperial warriors. There was a pause as Zoreth processed this information, his golden eyes narrowing. You allowed alien personnel aboard an Imperial vessel without authorization? Sir, with respect, our life support was failing and our casualties were approaching critical levels. The human assistance was essential to crew survival. Sarah watched the exchange with growing apprehension. The political implications of this conversation would ripple through both human and Croaxian space for years to come. But before she could dwell on the long-term consequences, Chief Martinez's voice crackled through her communicator. Captain, I need you in main engineering. Now, Sarah looked at War Commander Thakvar, who nodded his approval. Subcommander Krell will escort you. The journey to the Croaxian engineering section revealed the true scope of what her crew had accomplished. Corridors that had been dark and filled with the acrid smell of failing life support now hummed with restored power. Emergency lighting had been replaced with full illumination, and the oppressive heat that had characterized the ship during their arrival had dropped to merely uncomfortable levels. But it was the scene in main engineering that truly took Sarah's breath away. The massive chamber housed power systems that dwarfed anything she'd seen on human vessels. But it wasn't the technology that impressed her, it was the people. Human and Croaxian engineers worked together with the kind of seamless cooperation that usually took months to develop. She watched as Petty Officer Morrison, one of their junior engineers, demonstrated a repair technique to a group of Croaxian technicians who followed his instructions with the intense attention of students learning from a master. Captain, Chief Martinez called out as she spotted Sarah's arrival. You need to see this. Martinez led her to the primary power distribution center, where a mixed team of human and Croaxian engineers had jury-rig connections that defied everything Sarah knew about compatible technology. Explain to me how this works, Sarah said. That's just it, Captain. It shouldn't work. Croaxian power systems operate on completely different principles from ours. Their plasma conduits, their magnetic containment fields, their matter-antimatter regulators. Everything is different. But Martinez grinned, and Sarah could see the excitement beneath her exhaustion. But physics is physics. Energy is energy. Once we stopped thinking about the differences and started focusing on the similarities, we found ways to make their systems talk to ours. Sarah looked around at the engineering bay, seeing human diagnostic equipment interfaced with alien control systems, watching her crew members work alongside beings whose species had been considered potential enemies just hours before. Chief, are the repairs complete? Essential systems are fully restored. Life support is at 95% capacity, main power is stable, and we've sealed all the hull breaches. This ship isn't going to win any beauty contests, but she'll make it home. Before Sarah could respond, the ship-wide communications system activated, and War Commander Thakvar's voice echoed through the engineering bay. All hands, prepare for inspection by Battle Group Command. Human personnel will remain at their current positions and continue their assigned duties. Sarah activated her communicator. War Commander, should my people return to our ship? Negative, Captain Chun. Battle Group Commander Zoreth has requested to observe our joint operations firsthand. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself standing in the Skull Render's main medical bay alongside Dr. Vasquez as Battle Group Commander Zoreth and his entourage toured the rescue operations. The massive Croaxian leader moved through the facility with the kind of military bearing that commanded respect from subordinates and enemies alike. But Sarah noticed that his golden eyes lingered on the sight of human medical personnel treating Croaxian patients with the same care they would show their own species. Doctor, Zora said to Elena, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. "Explain your treatment protocols." Elena looked up from the Croaxian warrior she was treating, a young soldier whose arm had been badly burned in the initial accident. "Commander Zorith, we've adapted our standard trauma procedures to accommodate Croaxian physiology. The basic principles of medicine are universal, but the application requires understanding of species-specific characteristics. You treat Imperial warriors as you would treat humans?" "I treat injured beings as injured beings," Elena replied simply. "Pain is pain, regardless of what species is experiencing it." Zorith studied the human doctor for a long moment before moving to examine the patient she'd been treating. The young Croaxian warrior looked up at his battle group commander with obvious apprehension, but Zorith's attention was focused on the professional quality of the medical care. "Your arm," he said to the patient. "How do you assess the treatment you have received?" The young warrior glanced nervously between his commander and Dr. Vasquez before answering. "Sir, the human healers have restored function to damaged tissue that our own medical staff believed permanently destroyed. I will be able to return to duty." Zorith's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something that might have been approval in his golden eyes. The tour continued through the ship, with Zorith observing the joint repair operations, the firefighting efforts, and the coordinated work that had saved the Skull Render and its crew. At each location, he questioned both human and Croaxian personnel about their experiences, and Sarah began to realize that this wasn't just an inspection. It was an evaluation. Finally, they returned to the bridge, where Zorith took his position at the center of the command area. The view screen still showed his battle group, weapons powered but not targeting the human vessel. "War Commander Thakvar," he said formally, "prepare a full report on this incident for transmission to High Command." "Yes, sir. What should I emphasize in my report?" Zorith was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from the mixed human-Croaxian bridge crew to the tactical display showing the successful rescue operation. "Emphasize," he said finally, "that human assistance was both requested and essential to crew survival. Note that human personnel demonstrated superior adaptability, technical competence, and what can only be described as exceptional courage under dangerous conditions." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized the implications of his words. Furthermore, Zorith continued, "Recommend immediate revision of the official Croaxian assessment of human capabilities and intentions. Previous classifications appear to have been based on incomplete information." He turned to face Sarah directly, his massive frame imposing even in the alien architecture of the bridge. "Captain Shun, I have observed your crew's actions over the past several hours. I have seen them risk their lives for beings they had never met, adapt their technology and techniques to save a vessel they had never seen, and work with dedication that exceeds even our own military standards." Sarah waited, sensing that something important was coming. "The Croaxian Empire has indeed labeled humanity as dangerous," Zorith said. "But today I have learned that this danger comes not from hostile intent, but from an unreasoning commitment to preservation of life that defies strategic logic." He activated his command console, and Sarah saw him opening a communication channel to his entire battle group. "To all vessels of Battle Group 7, the human rescue operation aboard the Skull Render is to be classified as exemplary humanitarian assistance. All personnel involved are to be commended for their service to Imperial crew members. This incident will be cited as evidence of human reliability and character in future diplomatic proceedings." Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Dr. Vasquez had saved over 200 lives. Chief Martinez had accomplished repairs that Croaxian engineers had thought impossible. Her crew had risked everything to help strangers who had been designated as potential enemies. Battle Group Commander, War Commander Thakvar said, "What are your orders regarding future human-Croaxian interactions?" Zorith studied the tactical display for a moment before answering. "Effective immediately, humans are to be reclassified from potentially dangerous to reliable allies. Any human vessel requesting assistance is to be given full cooperation. Any human offer of assistance is to be accepted in the spirit in which it is offered. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. Furthermore, I will personally recommend to the Hegemony Council that humanity be granted full membership status with voting privileges. Any species capable of such selfless action under dangerous conditions has earned the right to help guide galactic policy. 3 hours later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Defiant as they prepared to depart the scene. The Skull Render was ready for the journey home, its crew alive, and its systems functional thanks to the joint efforts of two species who had learned to trust each other. Captain, Lieutenant Torres called from the communication station. Incoming transmission from War Commander Thakvar. Put him through. The Croaxian's massive form appeared on the view screen, but now Sarah saw something in his golden eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect, and what might even have been friendship. Captain Chun, before you depart, I wanted to thank you personally for what you and your crew have accomplished today. You have given me and my warriors our lives, but more than that, you have given us a new understanding of what humans truly represent. Sarah smiled. War Commander, we just did what anyone would do when they saw people in trouble. No, Captain Chun, today you proved that humans are indeed dangerous. Dangerous to hatred, dangerous to prejudice, dangerous to those who would rather see the galaxy divided by suspicion than united by compassion. As the Defiant disengaged from the alien Dreadnought and began its journey home, Sarah thought about the conversation she would have with her daughter. The girl had asked what humans brought to the galactic community that other species didn't provide. Now Sarah knew the answer. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was show compassion to those who had been taught to fear you. Sometimes being labeled as unpredictable was exactly the kind of reputation a species needed. And sometimes saving 800 lives was worth risking everything you had, because proving that hope could triumph over fear was the most important battle any species could fight. The stars wheeled overhead as the Defiant headed home, carrying with it the knowledge that the galaxy was a little less dark, a little less divided, and a little more dangerous to those who profited from hatred. Sarah Chun had never been more proud to be human.